Hello and welcome. Dr. Rasmussen with the Problem Solving Chapter, and in this talk I'm going to describe some key terms and a few other concepts. Now basically you guys lucked out. Why? Because this is my only PowerPoint, my only narrated lecture for the Problem Solving Chapter. Why is that? Well, I'm going to leave a lot of the problem solving material to class. Why is that? Well, because we're actually going to solve some of these problems that researchers have used in their experiments. So that'll be kind of fun, and I don't want to give away the answers by talking about it in my PowerPoint. I don't know if that's like an oxymoron, or I guess it's not an oxymoron. I don't know if that would happen. I hope you're watching the PowerPoints, but if you're not watching the PowerPoints, then I wouldn't be giving away the answers. All right, so let's get started here. So, what is problem solving? Well, problem solving is based on a problem. You're solving a problem. So, what's a problem? Well, it's some sort of obstacle between a present state and a goal state. Your current state and a goal state. That is what a problem is. And the solution is not oftentimes obvious. That's what a problem is. So solving a problem is arriving at a solution for that problem. Very simple. Now, what the outline is for this discussion is going to include some key terms you're just going to need to know. They're going to be kind of dry. Why is that? Because I'm not going to back it up with any evidence. There's also going to be some research looking at groups and how groups are influenced, or rather how groups influence problem solving. And then we'll talk a little bit, lastly, about neuroscience of problem solving. Okay, so let's get started on the key terms. So the key terms, we got well-defined and ill-defined. Sorry about that. The ill-defined should appear over a little bit more to the right. I just caught that. No big deal, though. Well-defined and ill-defined. So well-defined is when you have a problem and the answer is there's either correct or an incorrect answer. There's oftentimes a certain path that an individual will need to take while trying to solve a well-defined problem. Here's an example. Converting a unit of measure between its English and its metric equivalents. Oftentimes for a well-defined problem, you know exactly what you need to find. You know exactly what the solution should be. You just don't know what the solution is. You might even have the knowledge of how to do it. How to solve this question comes to mind. It's just you're going to need some time to solve it. An ill-defined question is almost the opposite of a well-defined question. An ill-defined question is a question where the path is unclear. All right? Oftentimes, too, there may not be one correct answer. Okay? So this has a couple different things. The path is unclear, and there may not be a clear-cut correct answer. So how should we dispose of nuclear waste? That's an ill-defined question. What college courses should I take? That's another ill-defined question. So ill-defined questions are a little more difficult, oftentimes because it's unclear and there's not oftentimes a clear, correct answer. But well-defined questions can be, really tricky as well. So that's the difference between the two, well-defined and ill-defined. Let's look at insight problems versus time-consuming problems. Insight problems is when an individual gets the solution like that. Boom! It's not fast. It's just the solution will pop into their head at some point in time, or it's like aha, I got the solution. So some sort of insight problem is when an individual gains insight into the solution. So a great example would be you understand how a magician performed a trick. So you're thinking about it, and you're like, got it! I know exactly how she did it. Okay? Time-consuming problems are similar, but they take more, they don't take more time, but the solution is achieved in steps. So it's a sequence of you're getting closer and closer and closer and closer and closer to the goal state. So a long math equation, some sort of long math equation, you're just chugging away, boom, chugging away, boom, chugging away, and you're getting closer and closer. But it's not like, in 5 seconds, the next step won't get you, that much closer. It'll just get you a little bit closer, okay? So that's the difference between insight-based and time-consuming problems. A mental set, another key word that you're going to need to know. A mental set is when an individual falls victim to solving problems the way that they've solved problems in the past. So a problem-solving set, also called an Einstellung effect. This is, I'm probably pronouncing it poorly, but no, actually I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's just my microphone isn't that great, so therefore you really can't hear it too properly. Anyhow, the Einstellung effect is the same thing as a mental set, a solving set. Uh, that word that I believe it's German. That is a word for attitude. Okay, so attitude. So, as well as the mental set, refers to the negative impact of prior exposure to similar problems. Just like I said earlier, right? A mental set is when you get stuck in almost a rut solving a problem the same way as you did prior, either pre-experiment or during the experiment, which triggers a familiar but inappropriate solution and prevents alternative solutions from being considered. So a mental set is when a person gets stuck in doing or completing an answer, arriving at a solution. Um, they do that because they've done it that way in the past. They may still get the correct answer. It may take them longer. They may actually even get the wrong answer because they're just stuck in the same rut of doing it over and over and over again. We'll talk a little bit about this in class, but this is research that has been posed by many researchers, but Ellis and Reingold, this is where this definition came from. Functional fixedness is in respect to fixation as well. This is when an individual basically they look at a task, a problem-solving task. They're given components, words, whatever, information, and they use that information for what they think the information is used for. So people oftentimes don't get creative with their thinking. They just use the information and use it just for that thing. So a functional fixedness is an instance of such negative transfer. So negative transfer is when this is going to be a problem where a solver's experience with a particular function of an object, okay, or information, but a lot of researchers say it's an object, impedes using the object in a novel way during creative problem solving. So just like I said, people fail to use creativity. They just go on what they know, all right? Now, this is different than a mental set, okay? A mental set is you get stuck in a rut of solving a problem the same way, because that solution that you arrived at in those other problems was successful. And now you're posed with a similar problem, boom, you try to solve it the same way and you fail. What do? You just keep hammering your head into the wall, doing the same exact route, because that's mental set. The functional fixedness is different because you don't really have much experience solving a problem with this. You just know the object or the information for what it is, and you only can use that object or that information for what it is. You can't think creatively and outside of the box. All right, let's keep going on. So what are some benefits of using prior knowledge to solve current problems? So there's a lot of research that looks at, like what are some various tactics that people use to improve problem solving. Well, one is using prior knowledge. However, this can be both good and bad. So this phenomenon of using prior knowledge of an analogical transfer, so using an analogy, is well established in the creative literature, and it can be beneficial as cited by those researchers. However, this is from Krisihiku et colleagues, I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly as well, 2016. Anyhow, however, the analogical transfer is not always positive. Under certain circumstances, prior knowledge or experience with a particular example or solution strategy may have negative effects for creative thought. Okay? So it's basically like someone gives you some sort of information. Okay? Once they give you that information, it is as though you can't go past that information. What researchers do find sometimes in these creative problem-solving tasks is they use that information that was given to them in their solution, even when they shouldn't be using that information in their solution. So this is a potential problem where the benefits or the negatives, it should be, of using prior knowledge. Okay, so let's get cracking here on the groups and problem solving. So groups, what do groups do to problem solving? Well, typically they're a good thing, except in some situations. Sorry, I really hope no one just starts attacking me and be like, oh my god, I can't believe he used Donald Trump, the President of the United States of America, the most important man on the planet. He used his picture to say that most of the time groups are successful, except sometimes, oh my goodness. It's alright. It's a joke, okay? Kind of. All right, so you got some people here working on a problem. Are they going to be better at solving this problem than if they were alone? Well, actually, yes, these people will be better than if they were trying to solve a problem alone, more than likely, okay? So typically groups are better than an individual. So this is a problem though when you put people in groups, is sometimes it doesn't always happen. We'll talk about the problem solving stuff, but here's some social psychology research you've probably heard of before. It's called groupthink. So groupthink is a problematic situation that you've probably gone over in intro to psych maybe, but definitely social psychology. It's where an individual it's not so much an individual, it's more the group starts to feel as though they need to maintain group cohesiveness, or they just answer with the group because they think the group knows best, and they hide and they kind of suppress their own thoughts that kind of go against what the group is thinking. So groupthink is a phenomenon where people tend to confirm with the group decisions, or conform, I guess you could also say, with the group decisions to avoid feeling as though they're an outcast, leading to errors in decision making. So you could think about this as problem solving or decision making, but in this little example, nice little example of the dude at the the guy at the head of the table is saying, so do we all agree? And you get a few people who say yes, so the guy on the left says yes, and then you got another guy saying yes, and then then everyone else started saying agree, yes. And the interesting thing is there are some people in there in that group who harbor these notions that no, this is a bad idea, no, we're doomed, no. But they're still saying yes, so that they can maintain this group cohesiveness. There's a lot of other factors at play here too, but this is groupthink. Oftentimes when when there's a large group of individuals, and they don't have secret ballots or secret votes and things like this. There's a lot of different characteristics. There could run the potential for groupthink. Okay, so interesting research, but this is where problem solving in groups could be problematic. But we're going to talk about where it could actually be helpful. So groups can be helpful sometimes, especially when there is a single solution. I have no idea what I was trying to say there, but basically what I'm trying to say for this, because I don't want to re-record this, the groups can be helpful sometimes, especially when there is some sort of problem-solving tasks, when there is a single solution. I put a single, it should just be a single. When there is just one solution, oftentimes this seems to be a benefit for individuals. So what these researchers, Laughlin and colleagues in 2006 did, is they had these participants, they had either one person, two people, three, four, five, six, so on, people, sometimes in groups, sometimes singly, all right? They had them work on a word-letter coding test, okay? So basically it was like a riddle. You had to figure out you just had to figure out this riddle. I don't need to go into the details. Now, there was a single answer, okay? Just like I was saying, there was a definite, this is a well-defined problem, very difficult, but well-defined, and they're going to arrive at an answer in some fashion, okay? As long as they keep chugging away at it. Now, what the researchers found is that the groups of 3 or more people, they perform better than those individuals who were just individual and or groups of 2. All right, so even when you had like 3 people compared to the individuals, 3 individuals, they performed better than those 3 individuals working individually. And the dependent variable was performance, and that was based on the number of trials. And so these people had fewer trials to solve this riddle. So kind of interesting that in, potential, and actually other research has supported this too, but working towards some sort of goal when it's a well-defined problem, oftentimes groups can be helpful. But in some situations, just like I said earlier, groupthink can happen, and that could be problematic. But here, groupthink really can't be problematic because there's going to be a single answer, and they can check their answers with the riddle. Okay, so I guess it'd be interesting to see how groups perform when it's some sort of ill-defined question. That'd be kind of interesting. But again, ill-defined is kind of difficult because there's not always a proper answer. All right, let's keep going on. Let's get to the neuroscience of it all, okay? So the neuroscience of problem solving. So what's problem solving? Where is it in the brain? Well, basically there's 2 main areas. One area that seems to be active oftentimes is called the default mode network, okay? The DMN, the default mode network. This seems to be an area that's active multiple times in our lives, okay? Also, the executive network, which consists of the lateral PFC, okay? The lateral prefrontal cortex on both sides of the brain, so bilateral, meaning on both the left and the right prefrontal cortex. Now let's take a look at some of this research, okay? So a lot of this research is by Buckner, but here's the default mode network. If you've never heard what this is, it's kind of a newer term in psychology, and researchers, since the research in respect to the functional magnetic resonance imaging, as well as other neuroimaging, started to see that when people are doing various tasks, there seems to be this network of modules within the brain. So these particular locations within the brain that seem to be active, and they're active at a pretty constant rate. So this area, the DMN, is used for simulating, which is creating a mental image. So simulating, creating a mental image for future events as well as occurrences. So whenever you're thinking about how to act, in a situation like, say, the first day of class, or how you're going to act on the second day of class, or what are you going to do, after you go up and you buy that cup of coffee, what are you going to do? You're mentally simulating what you're going to do. You're using your default mode network. Okay, so the default mode network consists of various areas: the prefrontal cortex, the insula, the inferior parietal lobe, so on and so forth. Okay, so this all comes from Buckner in 2013, but a lot of other researchers support this, find evidence for this, so on and so forth. But this is just where I took this information. Now, let me give you an example here of a default mode network, or rather some more information just to support what I was saying, and then I'll show you some pictures of the default mode network, the locations. So when we imagine that we have to, what we have for lunch, how to spend the next holiday, or how to resolve a dispute with a friend, these everyday stimulations are both internally focused and goal-directed. Recent neuroimaging studies have shown that imaging or simulating, okay, these future events is associated with activity in this default network. Some call it default network, some call it default mode network, same thing. So again, Buckner, Schachner, and this is actually research cited by Gerlich. I'm going to cite Gerlich a little bit later on. But here's some more evidence, not more evidence, but this is just the actual evidence of the default mode network. This is the activity. So this is the left side of the brain, left hemisphere of the brain, and you can see prefrontal cortex being active, and this is part of the default mode network. The inferior parietal lobe. I wanted to say lobe, but I said lob because lobule. So it's the lobe. It doesn't really matter. IPL, lobule, and that is towards the back, the bottom portion of the parietal lobe. Oops, I put both of them up there. I'll just leave that happen though. The lateral temporal cortex, so the outside of the temporal cortex, as well as the insula. Okay, so the insula would be that little structure right down in there, right above the temporal lobe. Yeah, those are four components of the default mode network. You also have the dorsal medial prefrontal cortex, so dorsal medial, top middle-ish portion of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. You also have the posterior cingulate retrospinal cortex. Okay, excuse me. That's towards the parietal lobe. That's in the parietal lobe. You also have the extended hippocampal formation. All right, and so parts of the hippocampus, right, as well as the ventral medial prefrontal cortex. Okay, so these are parts of the default mode network. Now, in respect to the executive network, this is an area that's implicated in solving problems. So, formulating a future plan consists of keeping in mind any information that might be related or relevant to the problem/solution, make decisions as how to proceed, and envision a sequence of actions that could lead to a solution. So this requires a lot of thought, a lot of thinking, a lot of foresight, a lot of analyzing. Now, what does the executive network consist of? Well, it consists of the dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex and the MTL, medial temporal lobe. Now here's the dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex, the PFC. All right, it's the outside dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex, so the dorsal top, lateral outside prefrontal cortex. That's bilateral, meaning both sides of the brain. This seems to be important for executive function. And the medial temporal lobe, the MTL, is this entire structure: the hippocampus, entorhinal cortex, parietal cortex, and the parahippocampal gyrus. Some even may say it's part of the fornix, maybe even the the mammillary bodies, the anterior thalamus. But much of the medial temporal lobe is considered this bottom portion, but you could throw all this into the mix too. Okay, so this is the medial temporal lobe. All right, so both of those areas, the executive network as well as the default mode network, seem to be important for problem solving. Okay, now the neuroscience behind what this girl is doing, well, what is she doing? She seems to be daydreaming, right? Is daydreaming helpful for problem solving? Is it? Let's take a look. All right. So daydreaming. Daydreaming may increase creativity for insight-based tasks. Okay. But it seems to fail at increasing creativity for analytical thoughts. So this is kind of interesting, right? You probably all heard that, or thought of that. Hey, if you daydream, you're more creative. And that might be true a little bit, but researchers have found specifically that daydreaming can be helpful for aha moment type of tasks versus these problems where you're time consuming. You're just going to keep chugging away. Daydreaming is not going to be helpful because you need to solve one step to get to the next, to get to the next, to get to the next. Okay, so daydreaming can be helpful for problem solving in some problem solving tasks. But what happens to the executive thought during daydreaming? So I'm just going to black this out really quick here because I don't want you to see the answer. Oh, I know, I've never blacked out a screen while I was recording. This is kind of cool. And everyone's like, whoa, what just happened? Whoa, captured my attention. So when, now Dr. Rasmussen forgot what he was going to say. Okay, so let's get back on track here. So when you're daydreaming, what's happening to your brain? Are you just kind of out in la la land? Can you even still process information? Can you even problem solve properly? What's going on? Well, actually, the cool thing that some researchers have recently found is that when you're daydreaming, activation within the executive network, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and the medial temporal lobe seems to actually increase. Yeah, so researchers believed before this that it decreased. People were just, the default mode network would start to come online and you'd start thinking about the future, just, dreaming off of whatever. It's almost like, you are, removing your consciousness and your awareness and probably not thinking about, these higher order thoughts. But no, it seems as though the executive network does seem to come online, and this could be potentially beneficial in these insight-based problems. Okay, so kind of interesting research looking at daydreaming and how it actually could be somewhat helpful for some individuals in some situations. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we just talked about neuroscience. We talked about groups and how they can sometimes be helpful as well as hurtful for problem solving, decision making. We also talked about a lot of key terms. Make sure you know them and be able to use them while we're in class. Thanks for tuning in, and be ready to problem solve, or what I was really going to say, solve them problems. Thanks, and have a great